The graduating class of 1961 at Wickenburg High School was a great class, especially the baseball team. Can't remember all the players' names on the team, but we'll try to mention a few who stand out in my thoughts. Starting with the pitcher, Charlie Nazar, and he played shortstop as well. The catcher, Gary Willis, was quite a talker behind the plate. Can't remember who played first base. Maybe it was my brother. He played first base now and then. At second was Gardner. It seemed Gardner was always getting hit by a pitch. Playing at third base, and it's a blank right now. At shortstop was Johnny Jones. Second thought, I think it was Mac Nixon who played third base. Jimmy Nelson played left field. Center field was Jimmy Seagull. Right field and pitch was my brother Jimmy. Johnny Jones, Mac Nixon, Charlie Nazar, and Jim Mathis were the pitchers, primarily the pitchers. As a kid, I couldn't wait until they had a baseball game at Souls Wash Park. That's what they called it back then, until they changed the name to Coventry Park. And still, the name is called Coventry Park. It was the only baseball field in town, and there were no dugouts. Also, there was no home run fence. The infield was something else. It was all dirt. Was not much of an infield with the dirt, because the dirt infield was cut to the bases. Back in those days, the head coach wasn't allowed to coach on the bases. He had to stay on the bench. It was remarkable the town leaders didn't make the baseball field more like a baseball field with the infield. But that's the way it was. Around 1963 or 64, the rancher down the road from the high school, the Simpsons donated land for the high school to have a baseball field and a track, but the Simpsons said no lights were permitted on the baseball field. At such time, the six-finger mitt was a big hit, but none of the players on the Wickenburg team, no one had a six-finger mitt. I saw my first six-finger baseball mitt when Wickenburg played Gilbert High School at home. The pitcher for Gilbert wore a six-finger ball glove. He was a lefty, and he was good. I heard the pros wanted him. Gilbert was hard to beat. I remember one game, the start of the season, and it was very cold and cloudy. It was really cold. After school, I ran home and told my mom where I was going. When I arrived at the game, everyone was leaving. I couldn't believe it. The game was called off because it was too cold and snowing. I walked home at a very slow pace and, of course, very disappointed. At the end of the season, I learned Wickenburg might be going to the playoffs, but they had to face Gilbert again. It was decided to have Sloan drive over in the middle of the week and play a game before playing Gilbert. In the game, Wickenburg was beating Sloan so easy, and then a terrible thing happened, and it was really devastating. Charlie Nazar was the batter. A high curveball comes at his head. Nazar didn't go down to get away from the pitch. Instead, the ball hit him in the head and knocked him out. That was the end of his high school baseball days at Wickenburg High School. He was going to start against Gilbert on the mound, but instead Mac Nixon started. The doctors decided it would not be best for Nazar to play in the game. I remember that at such time, Jack Ladden had to finish one of the games as the head coach because our head coach got kicked out of the game. The game was close. My brother was on third base, and his best friend Jim Nelson was the batter. Coach Gladden gets Nelson's attention. On the next pitch, my brother Jimmy takes off towards home plate, and it's a squeeze play, but Nelson doesn't bunt the ball. My brother Jimmy puts on his brakes and gets in a pickle, and somehow he got back to third base safe, and Coach Gladden gets all over Nelson. The next pitch, Jimmy Nelson gets a base hit and brings in my brother. Wickenburg won the game. All smiles, and everybody's happy. Was happy. Back in those days, the catcher, like I said, did do a lot of talking. In my opinion, it's something that I feel high school catchers have missed these days. The catchers now do not do any talking. Also, back in those days, players would give the other pitcher a bad time. and use his personal name. One game I remember the pitcher on the other team, and his last name was Nixon. Boy, did Johnny Jones and Gary Willis give the pitcher a bad time with his last name. I remember Johnny Jones yelling out, "Hey Nixon, you're going to be like Dick Nixon and lose." Of course, everyone had a good laugh on that. But nowadays, such stuff in high school baseball is not allowed. One more thing, and don't get me wrong, but it seemed back in those days, high school baseball players knew more about the art of the game of baseball. No doubt, that class at Wickenburg High School was very, very special to me.